Picture yourself stepping into the grand bathhouses of ancient Rome, where sunlight streams through high windows onto polished marble floors, and the air hums with the gentle murmur of water flowing through intricate channels. You're surrounded by beauty, order, and an almost sacred sense of cleanliness, a world away from the dusty, crowded streets outside. It's easy to imagine these spaces as sanctuaries of health and civilization, where people gathered not just to wash, but to connect, relax, and even conduct business. Yet hidden just beneath this shimmering surface of purity lay dangers so severe they could turn a place of refuge into a trap of suffering or even death. This is the fascinating and unsettling paradox we're diving into today: why the cleanest, most meticulously maintained places in ancient cities were often the most perilous. From the soaring temples of Greece to the advanced drainage systems of the Indus Valley, ancient societies poured immense resources, creativity, and labor into creating spaces defined by cleanliness. These were not just practical achievements, they were symbols of power, divinity, and human ingenuity. But what if I told you that the very elements designed to protect and purify also concealed threats that could undermine health, structural stability, and even survival? In this video, we'll pull back the curtain on history's most stunning sanitary innovations to reveal a world where sacred pools harbored deadly parasites, elegant aqueducts carried poison, and grand bathhouses became breeding grounds for contagion. You'll discover how something as simple and essential as cleanliness could weave a complex web of risk, one that ancient people navigated with a mix of brilliance, belief, and blind spots. By the time we're done, you won't look at ancient urban planning the same way again. We'll explore not just the how, but the why, how cultural values, economic pressures, and limited scientific understanding shaped these spaces in ways that balanced splendor with danger. You'll come away with a deeper appreciation for the challenges our ancestors faced and perhaps see echoes of their dilemmas in our modern world. So settle in and open your mind. We're about to journey through the beautiful and often deadly clean spaces of the ancient world. Imagine walking through the bustling, sun-drenched streets of ancient Rome or Athens. The air is thick with the smells of cooking food, animals, and humanity, a vibrant but overwhelming mix. Now turn a corner and enter the soaring, arched entrance of a public bathhouse. Suddenly, the world changes. Your feet meet smooth, cool mosaic tiles. The chaotic noise of the city fades, replaced by the calming echo of water and relaxed conversation. Light reflects off polished marble and glistening pools. This isn't just a place to get clean. It's a sensory oasis, a powerful statement of order and control in a world that was often messy, unpredictable, and dirty. For ancient peoples, cleanliness was about so much more than hygiene. It was a visible, tangible symbol of what it meant to be civilized, a demonstration of a society's power to tame nature itself, and a crucial act of reverence to appease the gods. Cities across the ancient world poured staggering amounts of wealth, labor, and engineering genius into creating these islands of purity. The Romans built thousands of miles of aqueducts, gravity-defying stone rivers in the sky, just to bring fresh water to their bath complexes and fountains. In the Indus Valley, millennia earlier, the people of Mohenjo-Daro designed an entire city with a sophisticated underground drainage system, ensuring waste was carried away from homes and streets. For the Greeks, the gymnasium and its accompanying baths were central to daily life, a place to nurture both the body and the mind. These weren't hidden, practical projects. They were grand public works, monuments to human achievement meant to be seen, used, and admired. They showed the world that a society was advanced, organized, and powerful enough to provide such luxuries for its citizens, and sometimes even for its poorest residents. Beyond the symbolism, these clean spaces became the vibrant heart of social life. The Roman Thermae were like ancient community centers, sprawling complexes where people went to meet friends, discuss politics, exercise, get a massage, and even enjoy library readings. In the meticulously swept agora of Athens, philosophers debated while vendors sold their wares, all within a space maintained to a higher standard than the surrounding alleys. And in cultures from Egypt to the Celtic world, ritual purification in sacred pools or rivers was a necessary precursor to entering a temple or participating in a ceremony. These clean areas offered a refuge, a temporary escape from the grime and crowding of everyday urban living. They attracted everyone: the wealthy elite, the common laborer, the traveling merchant, and the devout pilgrim. This universal appeal, this magnetic pull towards order and cleanliness, is what made them so successful, but it's also exactly what made them so perilous. By drawing thousands of people together into shared water, onto the same polished floors, and into enclosed, steamy air, these hubs of civilization became perfect incubators for hidden dangers, concentrating risk on a scale no one at the time could possibly comprehend. This remarkable achievement of hydraulic engineering, however, concealed a multitude of perils. The very pipes that carried life-giving water into Roman homes were often fashioned from lead, a metal whose sweet-tasting, slow-acting poison would seep into the supply. Over time, this constant, low-level exposure could lead to severe health issues, including crippling gout, cognitive decline, and even sterility, a quiet, insidious threat flowing from what appeared to be the pinnacle of sanitary progress. Furthermore, the complex network was not always a swift-moving river. Water would often collect and linger in massive holding tanks called cisterns, or in slower-moving sections of the channels. In these stagnant pools, shielded from the purifying heat of the sun, bacteria and parasites like giardia could thrive. A single drink from a seemingly clean public fountain could thus unleash a debilitating case of dysentery or a raging typhoid fever upon an unsuspecting population, with no understanding of the microscopic invaders responsible. The dangers were not limited to what was in the water, but also extended to the very people tasked with maintaining these complex systems. The maintenance and repair of aqueducts, sewers, and cisterns was brutally hazardous work, typically foisted upon slaves or the lowest classes. These laborers faced a constant threat of tunnel collapses or being swept away by a sudden rush of water in a confined channel. In the depths of the larger sewers, like Rome's famed Cloaca Maxima, workers could be exposed to pockets of suffocating, toxic gases like methane or hydrogen sulfide that accumulated from decaying waste. There were no protective masks or oxygen tanks. A single misstep or an unexpected inhalation could be instantly fatal. The magnificent public health infrastructure, therefore, relied on a foundation of immense human risk and suffering. Perhaps the greatest irony of these sophisticated water networks was their role in accelerating the spread of disease. By concentrating a clean, reliable water supply into specific, high-traffic locations like public fountains and bathhouse inlets, these systems also concentrated people. Where crowds gather, germs find easy passage. A waterborne illness introduced at a single popular fountain could rapidly disseminate throughout the city, carried home in jars and into the bodies of families who believed they were partaking in a civic benefit. The engineering marvel designed to separate a civilized population from the filth of nature had inadvertently created a highly efficient delivery system for epidemic disaster, proving that even the purest-looking water could be a vessel for invisible danger. Now, let's step inside one of these grand bathhouses to understand how this paradox played out in stunning detail. The scale of a major Roman thermae, like the baths of Caracalla or Diocletian, was simply staggering. These were not mere buildings, they were sprawling leisure complexes that could accommodate thousands of bathers at a time. You would first enter the apoditerium, the changing room, where you'd leave your clothes with an attendant. From there, the standard ritual involved moving through a series of rooms with progressively hotter temperatures. The frigidarium with its invigorating cold plunge pool, the tepidarium for a lukewarm acclimatization, and finally the coldarium, a steamy, domed chamber with a hot pool. The engineering behind this comfort was revolutionary. Beneath the ornate mosaic floors ran the hypocaust system, a network of pillars and channels that funneled hot air from furnaces, warming the rooms and pools above. Attendants would provide strigils, curved metal tools, to scrape off oil and grime after a massage, and you could even purchase soap made from animal fat and ash. On the surface, it was the very picture of hygiene and civilized living. Yet, this elaborate and seemingly sanitary ritual was unfolding in a petri dish of contagion. The most obvious hazard was the water itself. While fresh water flowed into the baths continuously from the aqueducts, it was a slow, gravity-fed system. The same water that entered a pool clean would circulate for hours, passing from one person to the next. There was no chlorine, no modern filtration. The water in a popular pool would quickly become a murky broth of human effluent, dead skin, and whatever else bathers brought in with them. This shared medium was a perfect vehicle for transmitting a horrifying array of ailments. Highly contagious skin infections like impetigo or ringworm would spread with ease. Trachoma, a bacterial infection that causes blindness and was endemic in the ancient world, could be passed along through contaminated water splashing into eyes. Even more serious respiratory diseases found an ideal home. The warm, moist air of the coldarium was perfect for suspending the droplets carrying tuberculosis or influenza, allowing a single sick individual to infect dozens of others sharing the same steamy, enclosed air. The social nature of the baths only amplified these risks. These were not places for a quick, private shower. They were loud, crowded, and intensely social arenas where people spent hours chatting, exercising, and conducting business. This necessary and desired close physical contact, sharing a bench in the steam room, jostling in a crowded pool, or receiving a massage from a shared attendant, eliminated any concept of personal space and created direct pathways for pathogens to jump from host to host. An outbreak that began in the baths wouldn't stay there. A merchant who contracted an illness in Rome could carry it across the empire, or a local craftsman would bring it home to his family, seeding a city-wide epidemic that originated in a place everyone believed was promoting their health. The very purpose of the baths as a communal hub made them a powerful engine for spreading disease. Adding another layer of danger, the baths were also considered a form of medical treatment. Roman medical practitioners, following the humoral theories of Galen, often prescribed bathing as a cure for various ailments. They might recommend the hot waters for rheumatic pains or the cold plunge for a fever. This meant that people who were already sick and contagious were actively encouraged to enter the very spaces where they could most easily infect the healthy population. The line between a hospital and a hazard was utterly blurred. The pursuit of wellness and cleanliness, supported by the best medical advice of the age, was inadvertently funneling the ill and the well into the same contaminated waters, creating a devastating feedback loop of infection that no one at the time could see or understand. But the engineering brilliance that created these marvels of public health also embedded terrifying risks within their very design. Consider the Roman public latrines, often large, multi-seat facilities that were social hubs in their own right. While the flowing water beneath the seats efficiently carried waste away, the chambers themselves were often poorly ventilated and located in basement-level rooms. In these confined spaces, the natural decomposition of organic matter produced highly flammable methane and the notoriously toxic hydrogen sulfide gas. Without adequate airflow, these invisible killers could accumulate to lethal concentrations. A maintenance worker descending into such a space with nothing more than an oil lamp for light could be instantly overcome by the fumes or, even more horrifyingly, trigger a catastrophic explosion. The same advanced plumbing that prevented disease on the surface could create a suffocating death trap just a few feet below. The sheer physical scale and weight of these structures presented another constant danger. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's Great Sewer, began as an open canal but was later vaulted over with massive stone arches, creating a dark, subterranean river of waste. The engineering was ambitious, but the methods for ensuring structural integrity were primitive by modern standards. The immense pressure from the earth above and the constant, corrosive flow of water and waste from within relentlessly tested the masonry. Collapses were not a matter of if, but when. A section of ceiling or wall giving way could trap and drown anyone working inside in an instant, burying them under tons of stone and filth. Even above ground, the heavy marble slabs and intricate piping of a bathhouse's hypocaust heating system placed enormous stress on foundations. A structural failure in a crowded public bath could lead to a floor collapsing into the furnace rooms below, resulting in devastating burns and crushing injuries for dozens of unsuspecting bathers who moments before were enjoying a symbol of Roman luxury. Beyond the gases and the threat of collapse, the very materials used to construct and maintain these sanitary wonders posed a more insidious, slow-acting threat. The Romans were famously fond of lead, using it extensively for pipes, water storage tanks, and even as a sweetening additive in wine. We've already touched on the poisoning from drinking water, but the danger extended to physical contact as well. Lead fittings and fixtures, constantly handled by maintenance workers or even bathers, could leach the metal onto the skin, where it could be absorbed or accidentally ingested. Furthermore, the primary cleaning agents available were often highly caustic. Lime, made by heating limestone, was a common disinfectant used to scrub down latrines, bathhouse floors, and kitchen areas. While effective at killing germs, wet lime is highly alkaline and can cause severe chemical burns on contact with skin or devastating damage to the eyes and lungs if dust was inhaled during its preparation and application. The desperate fight to keep public spaces clean and free of odor thus forced workers to handle materials that were, in their own right, quietly poisonous. This spiritual imperative for purity meant that the physical spaces dedicated to these rituals were maintained with a level of care and attention that often surpassed even the most luxurious secular bathhouses. In Jerusalem, the mikveh, a ritual bath used for spiritual purification, had to be constructed to very precise specifications. Its water couldn't be drawn or carried. It had to flow directly from a natural spring or rainwater, collected in a special cistern to meet the exacting standards of Jewish law. The stone steps leading into these pools were often scoured smooth by centuries of use and constant cleaning. Similarly, along the banks of India's sacred Ganges River, the stone ghats were repeatedly washed and decorated with flowers and offerings, presenting a gleaming, orderly facade to the thousands of pilgrims who arrived daily. The visual and sensory experience of these places, the smell of incense and clean stone, the sight of clear, still water, was designed to reinforce a feeling of transcendental safety and divine connection. creating a powerful, almost unshakable association between this visible cleanliness and spiritual well-being. Yet, this very dedication to ritual often masked severe biological dangers. While a mikveh's water source was ritually pure from a practical standpoint, the requirement for living, unmoved water often meant it was stagnant. Without a constant inflow and outflow to refresh it, a ritual bath could become a still reservoir, a perfect breeding ground for waterborne parasites, bacteria, and viruses. A pilgrim immersing themselves completely to achieve spiritual purity might unknowingly swallow water contaminated with the microbes causing dysentery, cholera, or hepatitis, contracting a physical illness in the very act of seeking spiritual cleansing. This paradox was even more pronounced at large-scale sacred sites. The Ganges, though revered as the goddess Ganga incarnate, capable of washing away all sin, has historically functioned as a central sewer for the communities along its banks. While devotees believed in its power to purify, the dense concentration of bathers, the practice of depositing cremated ashes in the water, and the lack of sanitation infrastructure meant the river often carried a high bacterial load, turning a sacred act into a significant health risk during times of outbreak. The danger extended beyond the water itself to the objects and the intense social intimacy inherent in these ceremonies. In ancient Egyptian temples, priests underwent rigorous purification rituals multiple times a day before handling sacred statues or performing rites. They would use natron, a natural salt, to scrub their bodies and rinse with water. However, the sacred vessels used for these libations, while gleaming and precious, were shared among the priesthood. Similarly, in Hindu puja ceremonies, the prasad, or food offering, is distributed to all devotees after being presented to the deity. In a time before understanding germ theory, a single ill person handling this shared food or a priest with a contagious illness could unknowingly spread disease through an entire congregation under the guise of a blessed communal practice. The close physical proximity required during group prayers, blessings, or ritual processions created ideal conditions for airborne illnesses to jump from person to person, transforming a sacred gathering into a super-spreader event long before the term existed. Perhaps the most profound danger was psychological and social. The immense cultural and religious pressure to participate in these cleansing rituals could override an individual's instinctive caution or awareness of their own sickness. To abstain from a mandatory ritual bath or a pilgrimage due to illness could be seen as a sign of weak faith or even moral impurity, bringing social stigma or religious penalty. A devout individual feeling the early symptoms of a fever might push themselves to complete their ablutions in a sacred pool, believing the spiritual benefits outweighed the physical discomfort, unaware they were now exposing dozens of others to their contagion. This pressure to conform and demonstrate piety created a silent conspiracy where the appearance of devotion could actively undermine community health. The clean, orderly, and devout exterior of these sacred spaces thus concealed a complex web of biological and social risks, proving that no amount of faith or scrubbing could entirely eliminate the peril woven into the fabric of ancient communal life. Now let's move from the steamy bathhouses and sacred pools into the vibrant, sunlit heart of the ancient city, the marketplace. Picture the Roman Forum or the Athenian Agora at the peak of the day. It's a symphony of chaotic energy, the shouts of vendors hawking their goods, the rich, mingling aromas of spices, baking bread and roasting meat, and the constant flow of people from every corner of society. To the average citizen, this was a place of abundance and community, a carefully managed space where civic authorities enforced rules to maintain a semblance of order and cleanliness. Stallholders were often required to sweep their areas and dispose of waste, and certain foods were inspected. On the surface, it was a testament to urban organization, a clean and inviting space designed to encourage commerce and display the city's wealth. But just beneath this bustling, attractive facade, the ancient marketplace was a perfect storm of hidden biological and chemical dangers. The most immediate threat was the water used in the market itself. To make vegetables and fruits appear fresh and appealing, vendors would frequently douse them with water. This simple act of presentation, however, could be a death sentence. That water was rarely drawn from a clean, certified source. More often, it came from the nearest public fountain, which might be downstream from a tanner's runoff, or worse, from a stagnant bucket that had been sitting for days, breeding microorganisms. A beautifully spray-misted head of lettuce could be coated in a fine film of bacteria, and a succulent piece of fruit washed in contaminated water could become a vehicle for dysentery or typhoid, delivering pathogens directly into the homes of unsuspecting buyers. The very act meant to signify freshness and quality was, in reality, a common method of contaminating food before it was even purchased. Beyond the water, the ancient desire to make food last longer led to preservation techniques that were as dangerous as they were ingenious. The Romans, for instance, were fond of using a sweet syrup called defrutum or sapa, made by boiling down grape juice in lead-lined pots. The lead leached into the syrup, which was then used to preserve everything from fruits and wines to the base for a popular fish sauce called garum. They had no idea that this sweetening agent was a potent neurotoxin. Over time, a diet rich in these lead-preserved foods could lead to chronic lead poisoning, with symptoms including severe abdominal pain, memory loss, and erratic behavior, an ailment some historians believe may have affected the Roman elite. Other preservation methods, like smoking or heavy salting, could sometimes fail, allowing anaerobic bacteria like Clostridium botulinum to thrive in airless environments within meats or jars, producing the deadly toxin that causes botulism, a then inexplicable and often fatal illness. The marketplace's fundamental nature as a central hub for people and perishables created an environment where disease could jump from person to person with terrifying efficiency. The close quarters meant that a vendor with a respiratory illness could easily pass it to dozens of customers throughout the day. Flies, attracted to uncovered meat and piles of organic waste, would land on food, transferring pathogens from the garbage heap to the dinner plate in seconds. There was no refrigeration, so on a hot Mediterranean afternoon, meat, dairy, and fish would begin to spoil rapidly. A shopper might be tempted by a discounted price on fish that had been sitting in the sun for hours, unaware they were purchasing a dose of salmonella or staphylococcus. A single contaminated item could cause a localized outbreak of food poisoning, and because people returned to the same central market daily, the source of the illness was nearly impossible to trace, leaving communities baffled by waves of sickness that seemed to come from nowhere. Even the efforts to keep the market itself clean could backfire spectacularly. Municipal slaves or the vendors themselves would regularly scrub the stone floors of the market squares using whatever was available, often ash, vinegar, or quicklime. While these substances could break down grime and neutralize some odors, their improper use created new risks. Ash and dirt could be swept into food stalls, contaminating supplies. Vinegar, if not properly rinsed, could leave a residue that interacted with certain metals in serving dishes, potentially leaching toxic compounds. The use of quicklime was particularly hazardous. This highly caustic material, made from burned limestone, was excellent for disinfecting areas soaked with animal blood and waste from butchers' stalls. But if a vendor was careless and didn't allow it to be thoroughly washed away, its corrosive dust could settle on nearby produce, causing severe internal burns if ingested. The relentless pursuit of a clean and orderly marketplace, therefore, was a constant balancing act where the solution to one problem could very easily become the source of another. Now consider the substances these societies relied on to achieve that gleaming, orderly appearance. The ancient pursuit of cleanliness demanded powerful agents to cut through grease, grime, and stains, leading to the development of a startling array of chemical concoctions. In Egypt, the primary tool was natron, a naturally occurring mixture of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate harvested from dried lake beds. This mineral was a true workhorse of cleanliness. Egyptians used it for everything from brushing their teeth and washing their bodies to preserving the dead through mummification. It was highly effective as a cleansing powder and disinfectant, but its abrasive, alkaline nature meant prolonged exposure could wear away tooth enamel and irritate the skin, leading to sores and infections that were ironically treated with yet more natron. The Romans took chemical cleaning to an industrial scale, particularly in the bustling phalanarchy, or laundries, that served the city's vast population. To clean and whiten woolen togas, fullers relied on a particularly foul-smelling but effective agent, human urine. Collected from public latrines, the ammonia in the stale urine acted as a powerful degreaser. Workers would stand in troughs, stomping on the garments submerged in this aged, fermented urine to work it through the fibers. While effective, the constant exposure to concentrated ammonia fumes in poorly ventilated workshops caused severe respiratory problems, chronic coughing, and eye damage for these laborers, who were among the lowest classes in Roman society. For tougher stains, they turned to a fine, clay-like earth called fuller's earth, which had impressive absorbent qualities. However, the constant clouds of dust generated from this clay, when inhaled day after day, could lead to a debilitating and fatal lung condition known as silicosis, slowly turning the lungs to stone. Perhaps the most widespread and dangerous cleaning agent was lye, a caustic substance made by leaching water through wood ashes. Virtually every ancient culture from Europe to Asia discovered this powerful alkali, using it to make primitive soaps for cleaning everything from clothes to cooking pots. While effective at breaking down oils and fats, lye is intensely corrosive. Even a small splash on the skin could cause painful chemical burns, and getting it in the eyes could mean blindness. The process of making it was equally hazardous. If rainwater was filtered through an ash pile to create lye water, an incorrect ratio could produce a solution so strong it would eat through a clay storage pot, spilling and causing injuries. More terrifying was the potential for accidental chemical reactions. If lye, often stored in simple containers, was mistakenly mixed with an acid like vinegar, a common household item used for cleaning, the reaction could produce toxic chlorine gas, creating an invisible, suffocating cloud in a confined household space. The danger extended beyond the workshops and into the most intimate aspects of daily life, personal cosmetics. The Roman ideal of beauty prized a pale, unblemished complexion, leading both women and men to use white lead carbonate, known as cerasa, as a foundation. They would apply this thick, lead-based paste daily to achieve the desired fashionable pallor, unknowingly absorbing a potent neurotoxin directly through their skin. Over time, this practice led to chronic lead poisoning, with symptoms including madness, infertility, and organ failure. Similarly, a popular red rouge was made from cinnabar, a toxic mercury sulfide. The quest for a clean, attractive appearance and the social status it conveyed thus came with a horrific hidden cost, proving that the tools of vanity could be as deadly as any industrial cleaner. This ironic twist, that the very act of purification could introduce new and profound dangers, was a constant, unseen shadow in the ancient world. A slave scrubbing a marble floor with lye might achieve a brilliant shine while damaging their hands and lungs. A noblewoman might present a perfectly clean, pale face to the world while slowly being poisoned by her makeup. The methods themselves, born of ingenuity and a powerful desire for order and health, were often blind to their own consequences. The relentless drive to separate the civilized human world from the chaos of nature and decay relied on a fragile and often perilous understanding of chemistry, where the line between cleaning and contaminating was invisibly thin and frequently crossed. All of this engineering and chemical effort to create clean spaces was not without a profound cost to the natural world, a cost that would circle back to haunt the very cities that initiated these changes. The ancient drive for urban cleanliness triggered a cascade of environmental consequences, many of which would have been completely invisible to the people at the time. Consider the sheer scale of resource consumption. A single large Roman bath complex like the Baths of Caracalla required a staggering amount of fuel to heat its water and hypocaust systems day and night. This voracious demand for wood led to widespread deforestation in the surrounding countryside. Hillsides were stripped bare of trees to feed the furnaces, and this loss of root systems made the land highly vulnerable to soil erosion. When heavy rains came, the denuded earth would simply wash away, silting up rivers and increasing the severity of floods downstream. A city that had cleared its hinterlands to keep its baths warm might then find itself facing catastrophic flooding, its own agricultural land ruined by the very process that powered its luxury. The pursuit of internal cleanliness was, in effect, exporting ecological degradation to the outer regions, creating a feedback loop of environmental instability. The manipulation of water sources created another set of unintended problems. To supply their aqueducts, Roman engineers would often divert entire rivers or tap the flow of springs that fed vital wetland ecosystems. While this provided a gleaming flow of water to urban fountains, it could starve downstream areas of their natural water supply, turning fertile marshes into arid plains and devastating the local flora and fauna that depended on that habitat. Furthermore, the impressive sewers that carried waste away from city streets had to empty somewhere, and that somewhere was almost always the nearest major river. The Cloaca Maxima, for instance, dumped the considerable waste of Rome directly into the Tiber. This transformed the river into an open sewer, especially downstream of the city. For communities living farther along the banks who relied on the Tiber for drinking, fishing, or irrigating their crops, this was an unmitigated disaster. They were now using water contaminated with the biological waste of 1 million people upstream, a perfect recipe for the constant outbreak of waterborne diseases. The solution to urban filth became a poison for rural neighbors. Perhaps the most insidious ecological impact was the creation of new breeding grounds for disease. The vast network of aqueducts, while brilliant, was not perfectly sealed or maintained. Leaks were common, and water would often seep from channels and cisterns, creating patches of perpetually damp ground and stagnant pools in the suburbs surrounding the city. These pools, warmed by the sun and rich in nutrients, became ideal nurseries for mosquitoes, particularly the Anopheles species that carries malaria. The same engineering that brought clean water into the city was inadvertently constructing a perfect habitat for one of antiquity's most deadly killers right on its doorstep. Similarly, the quarrying operations to extract the marble and stone for bathhouses and temples left behind large, water-filled pits. These abandoned quarries, often too deep to drain easily, would become stagnant ponds, adding yet more territory for disease vectors to thrive. The beautiful stone that signified cleanliness and order was, in a cruel twist, mined from landscapes that were then sculpted into landscapes of disease. This ancient struggle with sustainability holds a powerful mirror to our own modern challenges. The Romans and other advanced ancient societies were not ignorant of these problems. They were simply prioritizing immediate urban needs over long-term environmental health, a trade-off we continue to grapple with today. They created revolutionary systems to solve the pressing issue of filth and disease within their city walls, but they lacked the scientific understanding to foresee the broader ecological chain reactions they were setting in motion. Their world was one of cause and effect separated by both time and distance, making the connection between a deforested hillside miles away and a flood in the city, or a leaky aqueduct and a malaria outbreak, nearly impossible to trace. They were engineering on a massive scale with a localized perspective, inadvertently proving that no human settlement, no matter how advanced, exists in a vacuum. The environment always answers back, and the bill for cleanliness, much like the bill for any large-scale resource consumption, eventually comes due. This stark division of urban life meant that the experience of cleanliness and its attendant dangers was anything but universal. For the wealthy elite of Rome or the patrician class of Athens, hygiene was a private, controlled affair. They enjoyed the luxury of private baths within their spacious villas, supplied with fresh water from lead pipes connected directly to the aqueducts. Their latrines were often situated near the kitchen, midden for convenient waste disposal, but far from their living quarters. They could afford expensive imported soaps, perfumes, and cosmetics, and their food was prepared in separate, well-scrubbed kitchens by slaves who bore the risks of handling caustic cleaning agents. Their world was one of curated cleanliness, a bubble of perceived safety that, while not without its own hidden threats like lead poisoning, was largely insulated from the rampant contagion of the public sphere. For the vast majority of the population, the laborers, the poor, the non-citizens, the pursuit of cleanliness was a public and perilous endeavor. They relied entirely on the city's grand public facilities. While the impressive Thermae were often free or very cheap to enter, this accessibility came at a steep cost. The poor bathed in the same vast, communal pools as everyone else, immersing themselves in water that had already passed over hundreds of other bodies. They had no alternative but to drink from the public fountains that might be located downstream from a runoff channel or a leaky sewer pipe. They lived in densely packed insulae or apartment blocks where sanitation was minimal. Waste was often simply tossed from a window into the street below, to be eventually washed into the central drains by rainwater or the efforts of street cleaners. This constant proximity to waste and reliance on shared resources made the urban poor exponentially more vulnerable to every waterborne and airborne disease that swept through the city. The burden of this inequality fell heaviest on those at the very bottom of the social ladder, the slaves and the servants. It was this invisible army of laborers who were tasked with the dirty, dangerous work of maintaining the city's facade of cleanliness. Teams of slaves, often condemned criminals or prisoners of war, were sent into the dark, suffocating depths of the sewers to clear blockages, facing the immediate threats of collapse, drowning, and toxic gas inhalation. In the Phalanaki, the laundry workers, who are almost always slaves, spent their days breathing in the corrosive ammonia fumes from vats of stale urine used to clean clothes. The slaves who cleaned the latrines and bathhouses handled quicklime and other harsh chemicals without any protection, suffering burns and respiratory ailments. They were the ones who maintained the hypocaust systems, stoking the furnaces with immense quantities of wood in sweltering, ash-filled environments. For them, cleanliness was not a benefit but an occupation that shortened their lives through constant, direct exposure to the most extreme hazards. This unequal distribution of risk created a cruel irony. The sparkling clean spaces that symbolized the power and benevolence of the state and the elite were made possible only through the exploitation of the most vulnerable. The healthy complexion of a wealthy Roman matron, achieved with lead-based makeup, depended on the labor of slaves who mined that toxic ore. The fresh, clean water flowing into a senator's private villa was delivered by an aqueduct maintained by workers who risked death from falls or tunnel collapses. The very concept of public health was built upon a foundation of profound private risk shouldered by those with no choice in the matter. The system functioned precisely because the people most exposed to the dangers were also the people with the least political power and social standing to complain or demand change. The glistening marble of the city, therefore, hid a deep social fracture where the price of civilization for some was paid in the health and safety of others. To understand why ancient people continued to flock to places that secretly made them sick, we must step into their world and see through their eyes, a world governed by medical theories that made perfect sense at the time but were tragically misguided. The dominant force in Western medicine for centuries was the theory of the four humours, championed by the Greek physician Galen. This concept proposed that health was a delicate balance of four bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. An excess or deficiency of any one humor was believed to cause disease. This framework shaped every aspect of medical treatment and, crucially, its relationship with cleanliness. Since many illnesses were thought to be caused by an imbalance within the body's internal environment, the role of external cleanliness was often not about preventing infection from germs, but about maintaining a general state of equilibrium and comfort. A physician wouldn't see a public bath as a petri dish of contagion. He would see it as a therapeutic environment to open the pores, rebalance the humors through sweating, and soothe aching muscles. This worldview was compounded by the pervasive miasma theory, which held that diseases like cholera, plague, and malaria were spread through foul-smelling air, or bad air, emanating from rotting organic matter, sewage, and stagnant water. This belief created a powerful and ultimately dangerous link between smell and safety. If a place smelled clean, if it was scented with fragrant herbs, perfumes, or the clean, mineral smell of flowing water, it was therefore assumed to be safe. This is why the aromatic steam of a Roman bathhouse felt so healthy, and why a sacred spring, smelling of fresh water and damp stone, was deemed pure. The theory wasn't entirely without merit. Foul odors often did indicate the presence of waste and decay, which could be correlated with disease, but by focusing solely on the aroma, people completely missed the invisible, odorless threats lurking in that same clear, sweet-smelling water: bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Guided by these flawed but deeply held beliefs, physicians would often prescribe regimens that directly exposed their patients to greater harm. A doctor following Galenic principles might prescribe frequent visits to the public baths for someone suffering from melancholy, which was linked to an excess of black bile, believing the warmth and social interaction would restore balance. In doing so, he was sending a mentally vulnerable person, perhaps with a weakened constitution, directly into a crowded, humid environment rife with respiratory pathogens. Similarly, a skin condition like eczema or psoriasis might be treated with a salve or ointment. One of the most common bases for these medicinal creams was lead, prized for its soothing, drying properties. The physician, seeing the inflammation reduce, would believe the treatment was a success, completely unaware that the lead was being absorbed through the broken skin, slowly poisoning the patient and causing far greater damage to the nervous system and organs over time. The very definition of a healing spring was also a product of this medical misconception. Water that had a distinct color, taste, or smell, perhaps from a high mineral content or even from metallic contamination, was often deemed to have special curative powers. A spring that left a reddish-brown stain from iron oxide might be prescribed for weak blood. Water that tasted strongly of sulfur, which we now associate with the rotten egg smell of certain bacteria, was considered a powerful purgative. In reality, patients were drinking water potentially laden with heavy metals or harmful microbes, all in the sincere belief they were undertaking a healing cure. The clean, natural appearance of the spring and the endorsement of medical authorities gave these practices an aura of legitimacy that was almost impossible to question. This created a devastating cycle of risk. An individual would fall ill, often from a waterborne or airborne disease contracted in a public space. They would then seek treatment from a physician who, operating within the confines of humoral or miasma theory, would recommend a therapy, like a specific bath or a mineral water, that sent them right back into the environment that likely made them sick in the first place, or applied a topical poison to their skin. The cycle would repeat, with the patient and doctor both believing they were pursuing a path to health, while in reality, they were trapped in a feedback loop of exposure and misguided treatment. The authority of medical science, therefore, became an unwitting accomplice to the danger, sanctifying the very practices that undermined public health and making the cleanest, most recommended spaces some of the most perilous places to be. Even the most brilliantly designed ancient structures were often riddled with hidden dangers, their very blueprints embedding risks that their creators could scarcely imagine. The architectural marvels built for cleanliness and purity were no exception, their grandeur frequently concealing fatal flaws in both design and material. Consider the magnificent hypocaust system that heated Roman baths, a true wonder of engineering. This network of raised floors and hollow walls channeled hot air from wood-burning furnaces to warm the rooms above, creating a luxurious and even temperature. Yet this same system was a death trap in waiting. The furnaces required a constant, voracious supply of fuel, and if the flues or chimneys designed to vent the smoke became blocked by debris, soot, or even a bird's nest, the invisible, odorless killer carbon monoxide could back up into the bathing chambers. In a crowded, steamy caldarium, bathers might first feel a slight headache or dizziness, symptoms easily mistaken for the effects of the heat itself, before succumbing to unconsciousness and death from suffocation, all while surrounded by what they believed was the peak of civilized comfort. The choice of building materials selected for their beauty and durability introduced another layer of peril. The same polished marble that made temple floors and bathhouse pathways gleam under the light of oil lamps also created treacherously slick surfaces when wet. A single spilled drop of oil or water could turn a grand staircase into a slide, leading to serious falls, broken bones, or even fatal head injuries on the unyielding stone below. This risk was amplified by the very purpose of these spaces. Water was everywhere, and the constant humidity made everything damp. Furthermore, the immense weight of these stone constructions posed a constant threat. Multi-story bath complexes, with their heavy marble cladding, intricate mosaic floors, and vaulted ceilings, placed enormous stress on their foundations and support structures. In regions prone to earthquakes like parts of Greece and Anatolia, a minor tremor could be enough to trigger a catastrophic collapse. A supporting arch or pillar, weakened by the constant moisture seeping from the baths, might finally give way, burying dozens of people under tons of magnificently carved rubble. Even aesthetic choices made in the name of light and cleanliness could have dangerous consequences. Architects prized reflective surfaces, polished marble walls, sheets of mica, or even strategically placed pools of water to amplify the available sunlight and make interiors feel bright, airy, and pure. However, on a bright summer day, this could create intense, blinding glare that made it difficult to see, increasing the risk of missteps on those same slippery floors or near the edges of deep pools. In sun-drenched climates, these surfaces could also absorb and radiate intense heat, creating localized hotspots that raise the ambient temperature to uncomfortable or even dangerous levels, contributing to heat exhaustion for workers toiling in these spaces. The drive to create an atmosphere of sparkling, radiant purity through design could thus actively undermine the physical safety and comfort of the people within. These inherent architectural risks, built into the very stones of the city, were then compounded by the immense and unrelenting economic pressures required to keep such complex spaces functioning. The gleaming marble and flowing water of ancient cities came at a staggering price, and that financial burden created a silent, creeping danger all its own. Keeping these vast public spaces clean and functional was an endless drain on municipal coffers, funded through a patchwork of taxes, wealthy patrons' donations, and the brutal economics of forced labor. When money grew tight, as it so often did during wars, famines, or political instability, the first thing to suffer was maintenance. City officials faced an impossible choice: raise unpopular taxes or quietly allow essential repairs to be delayed. A cracked pipe in an aqueduct might be patched with a cheaper, lead-heavy solder instead of being properly replaced, slowly poisoning the water supply. A blocked section of sewer, too expensive to clear immediately, would be left to fester, allowing toxic gases to build up and overflow into nearby neighborhoods. What began as a minor budgetary shortcut could, over time, blossom into a full-blown public health crisis. This pressure to cut costs also led to the use of inferior and sometimes more dangerous materials. A contractor tasked with repaving a bathhouse floor might use a lower-quality stone that was more prone to becoming slippery when wet, dramatically increasing the risk of falls. The city might purchase a new batch of cleaning agents from a cheaper supplier, unaware that the lime was mixed with harsh impurities that could cause severe chemical burns to the slaves who had to handle it. Even the lead pipes, a known hazard we've discussed, were sometimes chosen not just for their malleability, but for their lower cost compared to more durable terracotta alternatives. The relentless drive for economy meant that the very tools and materials used to uphold a facade of purity could themselves become sources of new and unexpected risks, embedding fragility and toxicity into the heart of the urban landscape. During periods of severe economic decline, the situation grew even more dire. Grand bath complexes, once the pride of the city, could fall into a state of picturesque decay. Cracks in the hypocaust system would go unmended, leaking smoke and carbon monoxide into bathing areas. Weeds would choke drainage channels, creating new pockets of stagnant water perfect for breeding mosquitoes. The beautiful, ordered spaces that had been designed to separate civilization from chaos would themselves become symbols of neglect, accumulating physical debris and structural weaknesses that made them actively hazardous to use. A citizen seeking the therapeutic comfort of the baths might now be risking a collapse of a crumbling ceiling or an outbreak of disease from a poorly maintained pool. This economic reality created a vicious cycle. As public spaces became more dangerous due to neglect, the wealthy elite would increasingly retreat into their private, well-maintained villas, further eroding the tax base and public support for funding large-scale civic projects. The burden of maintenance then fell even more heavily on the state, which had fewer resources to address it. The poor, who relied entirely on these public facilities, were left with the most degraded and hazardous versions of them. The gleaming ideal of public cleanliness, a symbol of shared civic virtue, was ultimately a fragile illusion, perpetually vulnerable to the pragmatic and often harsh realities of ancient economics. This constant tension between fiscal necessity and public safety reveals a universal truth. The appearance of order and health in any society is often built upon a foundation of difficult choices and hidden compromises, a theme that becomes even more fascinating when we examine the powerful cultural beliefs that shaped these spaces. To truly grasp why ancient communities continued to flock to places that secretly harmed them, we must step outside our modern, scientific mindset and into their worldview, where the lines between the physical and the spiritual were beautifully, and sometimes fatally, blurred. For these societies, cleanliness was never just about removing dirt. It was a profound moral and spiritual act. In ancient Egypt, the concept of mat represented truth, balance, and cosmic order. Dirt and decay were not merely unsightly, they were manifestations of isfet, or chaos, a direct threat to the stability of the universe itself. To keep a temple scrupulously clean was to actively participate in upholding the divine order, a duty far more important than any temporary physical discomfort or illness. A priest might develop a cough after hours in a damp, incense-heavy sanctuary, but he would see it not as a respiratory infection, but perhaps as a sign of his struggle against chaotic forces, a worthy sacrifice for maintaining mat. This spiritual linkage created a powerful and often misleading trust in ritual over reality. The meticulous ceremonies prescribed for purification, washing with sacred water, fumigating with specific herbs, anointing with oils, were believed to effect a change not just on the physical plane, but on a metaphysical one. If a space had been correctly ritually cleansed, it was inherently safe, regardless of any visible or invisible physical threats. This explains why a sacred spring, whose water had been blessed by priests and used for generations, would continue to be venerated even if people occasionally fell ill after drinking from it. Those illnesses were likely interpreted through a spiritual lens. Perhaps the afflicted individual was being punished for a hidden sin, or a malevolent spirit had interfered despite the rituals. The idea that the water itself could be the vector for an invisible biological agent would have been an alien and unconvincing concept. The ritual had been performed correctly, so the problem must lie elsewhere. This deep-seated association also meant that appearance held immense power. A place that looked clean with sparkling water, swept floors, and gleaming white marble was automatically presumed to be clean in every sense of the word. The miasma theory, which we touched on earlier, perfectly exemplifies this. Since disease was thought to be carried by foul-smelling air, a place that smelled of fresh water, perfumes, or fragrant herbs was, by definition, healthy. The steamy, herb-scented air of a Roman bathhouse didn't just smell pleasant, it smelled safe. It signaled the absence of the rotting waste and stagnant pools that were thought to generate disease. This sensory reassurance was so powerful that it completely overrode any other evidence. The fact that dozens of people were sharing the same warm, cloudy water was irrelevant because the environment didn't smell of sickness. It smelled of lavender and mint. The visual and olfactory performance of cleanliness was a convincing enough argument for its reality. These cultural perceptions created significant blind spots where practical dangers were systematically ignored. A community might continue to maintain a beautifully constructed temple latrine, proud of its efficient drainage and clean stone seats, while remaining utterly unaware of the lethal gases slowly accumulating in the chamber below. The focus was on the orderly, civilized function of the facility, the successful removal of waste from the sacred precinct, not on the invisible chemical processes it created. The grandeur of the architecture and the success of the ritual became a shield against questioning. To suggest that such a magnificent and properly maintained space was dangerous would have been seen as not just irrational, but almost sacrilegious, a challenge to the cultural values that held the society together. This unwavering faith in symbolic purity helps explain the remarkable persistence in using known hazardous sites. There are accounts of certain sacred springs or baths being called the seat of the demons, or believed to be under a curse because people who visited them frequently became ill. Yet, rather than abandoning the site, the common response was to double down on the ritual protections: more prayers, more offerings, more elaborate purification ceremonies before entering. The problem was framed as a spiritual battle to be won, not a practical problem to be solved. The space itself was not at fault. It was the vulnerability of the individuals or the strength of the malign forces attacking a holy place that was to blame. This cultural lens, which prioritized spiritual causation over physical evidence, locked societies into cycles of behavior that perpetuated the very risks they sought to avoid, a testament to the immense power of belief in shaping human interaction with the environment. History provides us with stark, heartbreaking examples of this paradox in action, moments where the pursuit of purity ended in catastrophe. One of the most chilling incidents likely occurred in the city of Pompeii, not from the eruption of Vesuvius, but from a disaster years earlier. In the year 59 AD, a massive earthquake severely damaged the city, including its grand forum baths. While the full extent of the aftermath is lost, historians and archaeologists suggest that the complex, a symbol of Roman order, may have become a death trap. Weakened walls and compromised hypocaust systems could have led to partial collapses, potentially trapping or crushing bathers who had returned too soon, trusting in the solid, familiar marble around them. The incident would have been recorded not as a failure of engineering, but as a terrifying and inexplicable act of the gods, a punishment delivered upon a place of cleansing. The annals of history are also filled with accounts of mysterious plagues that seem to emanate from the most revered of sources. The historian Thucydides, in his gripping account of the plague of Athens that began in 430 BC, describes in horrifying detail the symptoms that ravaged the city: violent fever, unquenchable thirst, and painful ulcers. While the exact pathogen remains debated, many modern scholars point to typhoid fever as a strong candidate, a disease often spread through contaminated water. It is a haunting possibility that the source of this devastation, which killed perhaps a quarter of the city's population and contributed to its defeat in the Peloponnesian War, was not a filthy alley but a clean, public fountain or a sacred spring on the Acropolis, a trusted water source that had become lethally polluted. The Athenians, who saw their city as the pinnacle of civilization and piety, were brought to their knees by an invisible enemy carried in the very water they used to purify themselves. These disasters did occasionally spark moments of clarity and reform, though often through a lens still clouded by superstition. The Roman author and natural philosopher Pliny the Elder wrote extensively about the dangers of lead, noting its harmful effects on slaves who worked in the mines and smelting operations. He observed that it caused severe health problems, a remarkable insight for his time. While this knowledge didn't lead to a wholesale ban of lead pipes, the infrastructure was simply too vast and expensive to replace. It did influence some personal choices among the elite, who might opt for terracotta or ceramic vessels for storing wine and water. The reaction to such incidents was a complex mix of nascent scientific observation and deep-seated cultural belief. A sacred spring that sickened its worshippers might be placated with more elaborate sacrifices rather than abandoned, its water now considered too powerful for the unworthy rather than simply contaminated. The legacy of these events was a profound and enduring cultural anxiety, a superstition that clung to even the most beautiful spaces. The collapse of a bathhouse or the sudden sickness of a community after a festival created a folklore of danger. Certain springs, despite their crystal-clear appearance, might gain a reputation for being cursed or inhabited by capricious nymphs. their very beauty a warning of their peril. This wasn't just primitive fear, it was a form of embedded risk assessment, a cultural memory that taught people to approach even the most inviting places with a degree of caution. The cleanest spaces, therefore, were not just physically dangerous, they were psychologically complex, representing both the height of human achievement and the unsettling truth that safety is always an illusion, and that danger often lies hidden in the most beautiful of guises. It's a sobering thought that the very principles of human ingenuity, cultural aspiration, and our desire for purity that shaped the ancient world are still very much at work today, creating modern spaces that mirror the same complex paradoxes of cleanliness and hidden danger. The grand Roman bathhouse finds its direct descendant in our sprawling public aquatic centers and luxury spas. These modern temples of wellness and recreation are marvels of chlorination and filtration, designed to provide a safe, communal water experience. Yet, despite our advanced science, they remain hotspots for the transmission of everything from chlorine-resistant cryptosporidium parasites to plantar warts and Legionnaire's disease, an illness literally named for its outbreak among a group of convention-going American legionnaires who were likely exposed through a contaminated air conditioning system. The fundamental challenge remains unchanged. Whenever you concentrate people in a shared medium of water for the purpose of cleansing and socializing, you create an ideal environment for the spread of contagion, no matter how many chemicals you add to the mix. Even our most sacred modern spaces of purity are not immune. Hospitals, the very institutions we trust to make us well, are ground zero for the evolution of some of the most frightening modern pathogens. The relentless use of antibiotics and powerful disinfectants within their walls has applied an immense evolutionary pressure, selecting for the hardiest, most resistant strains of bacteria. The result is the rise of superbugs like MRSA and VRE, which thrive in these seemingly sterile environments, preying on patients with vulnerable immune systems. This creates a devastating irony that would be all too familiar to an ancient Roman. The most intensive efforts to create a clean, germ-free zone can inadvertently foster the development of even more dangerous, invisible threats. Our technological solution to one problem has, in a classic echo of history, generated a new and more resilient one. The ancient lesson of lead pipes also carries a chillingly modern resonance. While we've largely eliminated lead from our plumbing, the crisis in Flint, Michigan, stands as a brutal testament to how infrastructure neglect and misguided economic decisions can still poison a water supply, disproportionately harming the most vulnerable communities in a stark repetition of ancient social inequalities. Furthermore, we've simply traded one set of chemical risks for another. The very plastic pipes we use to replace lead can sometimes leach phthalates or other endocrine-disrupting compounds into our water, while the byproducts created when chlorine interacts with organic matter in the water supply have been linked to long-term health concerns. Our quest for chemically pure water is an ongoing experiment, revealing that each technological fix can carry its own subtle, long-term cost, much like the Roman reliance on lead-based supper. Perhaps the most profound parallel lies in our cultural perception of cleanliness itself. The ancient miasma theory, which equated foul smells with disease, has been replaced by a modern, marketing-driven obsession with sterility. We surround ourselves with a dizzying array of antibacterial soaps, wipes, and sprays, creating home environments that are arguably too clean. This hypervigilance may be preventing our immune systems from receiving the necessary early training to distinguish between real threats and harmless antigens, potentially contributing to the rise in allergies and autoimmune disorders. Just as the ancient world's focus on ritual and olfactory purity created a blind spot for invisible biological threats, Our focus on creating a completely germ-free existence may be weakening our body's natural defenses, demonstrating that the definition of clean is always a balance, not an absolute. This historical perspective ultimately teaches us a crucial, humbling lesson. There is no perfect, permanent state of cleanliness, only a continuous process of negotiation with our environment. The ancient world shows us that the pursuit of purity is a fundamental human drive, but it is often pursued with incomplete knowledge and creates unintended consequences. Their story urges us to adopt a more holistic, thoughtful approach to our own spaces today, one that values robust, well-maintained infrastructure, acknowledges the complex ecosystems of microbes we live with, and understands that true safety requires looking beyond surface-level appearances to understand the hidden interconnectedness of our systems. The gleaming marble of the past and the stainless steel of the present both remind us that the greatest dangers are often the ones we design into our environments with the very best of intentions. What emerges from the ruins of ancient cities is not just a tale of danger, but a masterclass in urban planning, filled with hard-won wisdom that resonates powerfully today. One of the most critical lessons is the principle of redundancy and diversification. The ancient Romans, for all their engineering genius, created a critical vulnerability by relying on a few massive aqueducts to supply entire cities. When a single aqueduct was compromised by siege, earthquake, or simply the need for maintenance, it could cripple a metropolis, forcing a desperate population back onto contaminated well water and triggering outbreaks of disease. This over-reliance on a centralized, monolithic system stands in stark contrast to the more resilient approaches seen elsewhere. In the ancient Cambodian capital of Angkor, for example, engineers created a vast, decentralized network of massive reservoirs called barrays and countless smaller ponds, capturing monsoon rainwater and distributing the supply across the landscape. This not only provided a buffer against drought, but also prevented a single point of failure from becoming a city-wide catastrophe. The modern lesson is clear: our own urban water and power grids, often dependent on centralized plants and single-source pipelines, inherit the same Roman vulnerability. The ancient wisdom points us toward building distributed, networked systems where the failure of one component doesn't spell disaster for all. We also see a brilliant precedent for managing waste and water separately, a concept we still struggle with today. In the Indus Valley cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, dating back over 4,000 years, archaeologists have uncovered something extraordinary: a dual drainage system. Homes had chutes that separated solid waste, which fell into brick-lined bins at street level for collection, from wastewater, which flowed into covered, centralized drains running beneath the main streets. This separation of streams prevented the contamination of rainwater and reduced the burden on the main sewers, a concept modern engineers call source separation. Compare this to the combined sewer systems of many 19th-century European and American cities, which funneled both stormwater and raw sewage into the same pipes, leading to catastrophic overflows during heavy rains that pollute rivers and coastlines. The ancient Indus Valley solution was arguably more sophisticated and certainly more sustainable, highlighting a timeless principle: managing different types of waste with tailored solutions is far more effective than mixing them into a single, problematic stream. Furthermore, ancient planners demonstrated a profound, albeit intuitive, understanding of zoning for public health. Many cultures instinctively placed their latrines and waste disposal areas downwind and downstream from their main living and water-fetching areas. The Romans, for instance, typically built their latrines near running water sources that could quickly carry waste away, and they often positioned them on the outskirts of residential districts. This wasn't just about odor control. It was a practical mitigation of miasmatic theory that, by happy accident, actually reduced the concentration of pathogens near population centers. This stands in opposition to the industrial-era cities that allowed factories emitting toxic fumes and waste to operate directly alongside crowded tenements with devastating health consequences. The ancient approach shows a respect for the natural flow of wind and water, using geography as a tool to create passive hygienic buffers. Modern urban design can relearn this by using natural landscapes and careful zoning to create healthier cities, positioning potential pollution sources away from residential areas and utilizing green spaces as natural filtration systems. Perhaps the most humbling lesson is the danger of solving one problem while blindly creating another, a phenomenon known as the trade-off. The Roman aqueducts solved the problem of water scarcity but introduced the problem of lead poisoning. Their magnificent public baths solved the problem of personal hygiene but became engines of disease transmission. Their sewer systems solved the problem of waste removal but created toxic gas traps for maintenance workers. Every technological fix came with a hidden cost. This teaches us to adopt a more holistic, systems-thinking approach to modern urban design. Before we implement a grand solution, like a new water treatment plant or a waste-to-energy incinerator, we must ask not only what problem it solves, but what new problems it might create. Will it consume excessive energy? Could it leach chemicals into the groundwater? Does it simply move the waste problem to another community? The ancient world's struggles remind us that there are no silver bullets, only careful, considered balances. By studying their successes and their profound failures, we gain not a blueprint to copy, but a wisdom to emulate, the wisdom to look beyond the immediate, gleaming solution and anticipate the hidden dangers that might lie just beneath the surface. While the grand systems of aqueducts and bathhouses represent the monumental efforts of the state, the daily reality of navigating these spaces fell to ordinary individuals who developed a rich and often ingenious tapestry of personal strategies to mitigate the very real dangers they sensed around them. Without the framework of germ theory, ancient people relied on a sophisticated blend of observation, folk wisdom, and practical intuition to protect themselves, creating a fascinating history of personal risk management long before the advent of modern public health. For instance, a savvy Roman citizen might choose to visit the public baths during the merenda, the mid-afternoon lull, rather than in the crowded evening hours. This wasn't just about securing a quieter experience. It was a calculated decision to avoid the thick, steamy air of the coldarium when it was most saturated with the breath and sweat of thousands, a conscious effort to reduce exposure to what they might have vaguely understood as bad air or contagion. This intuitive risk assessment extended to water sources as well. While the aqueducts delivered water to public fountains, many people remained deeply skeptical of its quality, especially if it had traveled through long, lead-lined pipes. It was common practice to let water sit in large ceramic dolia jars, allowing sediment to settle to the bottom before drawing from the top. Some might even employ primitive filtration, pouring water through a thick cloth or a porous sandstone vessel to remove visible particulates and, unknowingly, some of the larger microbial contaminants. Travelers, in particular, developed a keen eye for safe springs, preferring those that were fast-flowing and emerged from rocky crevices over still, marshy pools. They observed the health of animals drinking from a source and noted the absence of a foul smell or a metallic taste, building a robust body of folk knowledge that was passed down through generations, effectively creating an oral map of relative water safety. Within the home, personal agency was even more pronounced. Wealthier households might insist that water for drinking be collected from a specific, trusted fountain at dawn, believed to be the purest time before the day's contamination began. For cleaning, while the state used harsh lye and quicklime in public spaces, individuals often preferred milder, known-safe alternatives. Vinegar, a weak acid, was a ubiquitous household disinfectant used for washing produce and cleaning surfaces. Ash from the hearth mixed with fat to form a simple soap was a less caustic option than industrial-strength cleaners. There is also evidence from places like Pompeii of people using crushed rosemary, thyme, or other aromatic herbs not just for their scent, but for their mild antibacterial properties, an early form of natural antiseptic that was less damaging to skin and lungs than the chemicals used by professional cleaners. This focus on personal ingenuity forces us to reconsider a simplistic view of ancient people as helpless victims of their environment. They were not blindly walking into danger. They were active participants in a constant, subtle negotiation with the hidden perils of their world. A mother might warn her children away from a particular public latrine known to have foul-smelling air, correctly associating the odor with a feeling of sickness. A craftsman might wear a simple cloth over his nose and mouth while mixing cleaning powders, a rudimentary form of respiratory protection. These were the small, everyday acts of resilience that existed alongside the grand systemic failures. They represent a profound form of human intelligence, the ability to perceive patterns, adapt behavior, and share crucial information within a community, all in an effort to carve out islands of safety within a beautiful but dangerous constructed world. This narrative of individual adaptation and folk science is a vital counterpoint to the story of architectural marvels and toxic infrastructure, reminding us that history is shaped not only by the failures of systems, but by the enduring ingenuity of the people who live within them. This relentless drive for order and purity, even in the face of hidden peril, forces us to confront a much deeper question that has troubled philosophers for millennia. What is the true cost of civilization itself? The gleaming marble of the bathhouse and the smoothly flowing aqueduct were not just engineering projects, they were powerful statements of values. They proclaimed that humanity could impose its will on a chaotic natural world, creating islands of perfect, controlled order. Yet, in doing so, these societies were constantly making a brutal, often unconscious, ethical calculation. They were prioritizing the appearance of safety and the ideal of purity over the messy, complex reality of actual well-being. This tension between the symbolic and the real is a thread that runs through all of human history. We build beautiful facades to reassure ourselves of our control, sometimes willfully ignoring the cracks forming in the foundation. A thinker like Seneca, who witnessed the extravagance and underlying anxieties of Nero's Rome, would have seen this paradox with piercing clarity. Stoicism taught the importance of living in accordance with nature and reason. From this viewpoint, the obsessive pursuit of external cleanliness, the mountains of imported soap, the slaves endlessly scrubbing floors, could be seen as a form of moral distraction. If a citizen was focused on the purity of their marble tiles but indifferent to the poison in their pipes or the suffering of the slaves who maintained them, were they truly virtuous? Seneca might have argued that this was a hollow performance of purity, one that masked a deeper spiritual corruption. The real filth wasn't the grime on the street, but the injustice and short-sightedness that allowed such systemic dangers to persist. The quest for cleanliness had become unmoored from its true purpose, the genuine health of the community. On the other side of the ancient world, Confucius would have analyzed the same situation through a different lens, that of righteous leadership and social responsibility. In his philosophy, a ruler's primary duty was to ensure the welfare of the people through benevolent governance. The construction of bathhouses and aqueducts could be seen as a fulfillment of that duty, a tangible way the state provided for its citizens. However, if those very projects were causing harm, whether through lead poisoning or concentrated disease, the ethical failure would lie with the leadership. A truly righteous leader, in the Confucian view, would be obligated to seek out these hidden harms, to listen to the whispers of illness, and to correct course. The value of order was only virtuous if it served the people's true needs, not just the appearance of prosperity. To prioritize the symbol over the substance would be a profound betrayal of the mandate of heaven. This ancient debate echoes powerfully in our own time. We still grapple with the same ethical trade-offs. Do we prioritize economic growth that provides jobs and stability, even if it means accepting certain levels of industrial pollution that sicken communities downwind? Do we build impressive new infrastructure projects that symbolize progress, if the cost-cutting required to fund them means using cheaper, more hazardous materials? Our modern equivalents of the Roman bathhouse might be our gleaming airports, our sprawling shopping malls, or our spotless corporate headquarters spaces designed to project an image of efficiency and safety, yet which can harbor their own hidden environmental costs, psychological stresses, or vulnerabilities. The central dilemma remains unchanged. How do we balance our desire for the symbols of a well-ordered society with the difficult, often expensive work of ensuring its genuine health and sustainability? The answers we choose reveal not just our technological capability, but our fundamental values and our willingness to look beyond the beautiful surface to confront the complex and sometimes dangerous reality beneath. For centuries, the true price of ancient cleanliness was shrouded in legend and historical guesswork, but modern archaeology has pulled back that curtain with startling, tangible evidence. The silent testimony comes not from grand statues or faded scrolls, but from the bones of the people themselves. Bioarchaeology, the study of human remains, has revealed a stark truth hidden in the skeletons of the Roman Empire. By analyzing the mineral content of bones, scientists have detected severely elevated levels of lead in remains from all social classes, but the highest concentrations are often found in the wealthy elites who could afford piped water directly into their homes and lead-reinforced cosmetics for their faces. This isn't just a statistical anomaly, it's a direct chemical signature of a slow, systemic poisoning, a toxic legacy flowing from the very pipes that symbolized Roman advancement. Similarly, the analysis of dental calculus, the hardened plaque on ancient teeth, has uncovered microscopic fibers from cleaning cloths and residues of abrasive pastes, painting a vivid picture of the harsh, gritty substances people used in their daily pursuit of oral hygiene, often wearing down enamel and exposing teeth to infection. The very drains and conduits of these clean spaces have become treasure troves of hidden truth. In the excavated sewers beneath Roman bathhouses and latrines, archaeologists have sifted through layers of compacted waste, a process unglamorously known as sewer archaeology. Within this preserved matrix, they've found more than just broken pottery and lost coins. Chemical residue analysis of these layers has detected traces of powerful disinfectants and cleaning agents, like quicklime and strong alkalis, confirming historical texts that describe rigorous cleaning regimens. But these same samples also reveal the presence of intestinal parasites, the eggs of whipworms and roundworms, which are incredibly resilient and can survive for millennia. This creates a jarring paradox preserved in the dirt, proof that despite the daily scrubbing with caustic chemicals, the parasitic inhabitants of the human gut still thrived, washed from one person's body only to linger in the environment, waiting for the next host. The clean, swept floors above masked a persistent, invisible ecosystem of disease just below the surface. Our understanding has been utterly revolutionized by technologies that allow us to see what the eye cannot. Ground-penetrating radar has mapped the vast, hidden networks of pipes and drains beneath ancient cities without ever lifting a shovel, revealing previously unknown connections and, crucially, points of failure. These scans show where pipes crossed or where leaks from a sewer line might have silently contaminated a freshwater channel, creating a perfect map of how engineering flaws could inadvertently spread illness. Even more precise is atomic absorption spectroscopy, a technique that allows scientists to take a tiny sample of an ancient material, a piece of pottery, a stain on a floor, a segment of bone, and identify its exact elemental composition. This is how we know for certain that a particular jug contained wine sweetened with lead-based defrutum, or that the vibrant red pigment on a palace wall was made from toxic cinnabar. These tools act as a kind of forensic time machine, allowing us to analyze a crime scene that is thousands of years old and pinpoint the exact substances that made the cleanest, most beautiful spaces so dangerously toxic. Perhaps the most profound impact of this evidence is how it has changed the narrative from speculation to measurable scale. We can now move beyond wondering if lead poisoning was a problem to understanding how much of a problem it was, calculating approximate exposure levels, and modeling the likely health impacts across a population. We can see that the danger wasn't a rare accident but a constant, low-level exposure affecting nearly everyone, a pervasive background hazard of urban life. This shifts our perspective on history itself. The sometimes erratic behavior of a Roman emperor like Caligula or Nero, historically attributed to mere cruelty or madness, can now be re-examined through the plausible lens of chronic lead poisoning, which is known to cause paranoia, hallucinations, and cognitive decline. It suggests that the very engine of an advanced civilization might have been slowly poisoning its leaders and its citizens, weaving a thread of neurotoxicity into the fabric of political and daily life. The archaeological evidence doesn't just tell us about ancient plumbing. It provides a new, deeply materialist key to understanding the fate of entire societies, showing that their greatest achievements and their most perilous vulnerabilities were often one and the same. If we could take a journey across the ancient world, visiting the great centers of civilization at their peak, we would find a fascinating tapestry of approaches to cleanliness, each woven from the threads of local environment, religious belief, and technological ingenuity. The Romans, with their monumental aqueducts and vast imperial bath complexes, present one extreme, a society that pursued public hygiene with an almost industrial fervor, creating magnificent spaces for communal cleansing that were, as we've seen, also hotbeds of contagion. Their entire system was predicated on a constant, massive flow of water, an engineering solution to the problem of filth. Yet, this very solution concentrated people and pathogens, while the materials they relied on, lead for pipes and solder, introduced a slow, insidious poison into the heart of their cities. The Roman model was one of grandeur and centralized state-sponsored cleanliness, but it was a grandeur that masked immense and systemic risk. Travel east to the Indus Valley cities of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, and you find a strikingly different philosophy. Here, over 4,000 years ago, urban planning exhibited a remarkable focus on decentralized, practical sanitation. Nearly every home had its own bathing area with a drain, and an extensive, covered sewer network ran beneath the main streets, channeling waste away from living spaces. They even had clever, tapered terracotta pipes that used water velocity to minimize blockages. This was a society that seemed to prioritize function over form, embedding cleanliness into the very infrastructure of daily life in a way that was arguably more effective and less hazardous than the Roman model. There is little evidence of the grand, communal bathhouses that would become disease amplifiers in Rome. Instead, hygiene was a more private, household affair. This likely reduced the risk of mass disease transmission, though the constant proximity to water channels and drains would have still presented dangers from waterborne parasites and the ever-present risk of flooding or structural collapse in the intricate underground networks. The ancient Greeks offer another distinct variation on this theme. Their culture celebrated the athletic human form, and this was reflected in their approach to cleanliness. While they had public baths known as balneae, these were often simpler, steam-based affairs compared to the Roman Thermae. More central to Greek life was the gymnasium, a complex dedicated to physical training and intellectual pursuit. Here, athletes would cover their bodies in oil and dust before exercising, scraping it all off with a strigil afterwards, a form of cleansing that was more about grooming and ritual than deep hygiene. The water supply for these facilities often came from local springs or cisterns, and while this avoided the long-distance contamination risks of Roman aqueducts, it made Greek cities vulnerable to drought and localized contamination. The Greek approach was more modest, more integrated with daily exercise and philosophy, but it still created shared spaces where skin infections and other ailments could easily pass from one person to the next. In the sun-baked realm of ancient Egypt, cleanliness was inextricably linked to religion and the concept of cosmic order and truth. Priests were required to undergo elaborate purification rituals multiple times a day, shaving their entire bodies to avoid lice and washing in sacred pools before entering temple precincts. For the elite, personal hygiene involved using a paste of natron, a naturally occurring salt, to clean their bodies and teeth. This focus on ritual and symbolic purity was profound, but it could also create blind spots. A sacred temple pool, scrupulously maintained and believed to be blessed by the gods, might be sourced from the Nile, a river that also served as the main thoroughfare for waste and transportation. The very act of spiritual cleansing could therefore involve immersion in water that was biologically contaminated, demonstrating a powerful cultural disconnect between perceived ritual purity and actual physical sanitation. Finally, crossing the Atlantic to the Mesoamerican civilizations like the Maya, we see a model shaped by entirely different environmental and cultural constraints. Without large domesticated animals like cattle or horses, these cities did not grapple with the same volume of animal waste that plagued European and Asian centers. Their waste management was often more localized, with organic refuse likely used for fertilizing the intricate garden plots within city limits. The Maya did build sophisticated choltons, underground cisterns lined with plaster to capture and store rainwater during the dry season. While a brilliant adaptation to their environment, these stagnant water reserves could become breeding grounds for mosquitoes and waterborne pathogens, creating a persistent health hazard that was the direct result of their solution to water scarcity. Their concept of cleanliness was also deeply tied to ritual sweat baths known as temazcals, which were used for both spiritual and physical purification. These small, enclosed steam chambers, while therapeutic, could also facilitate the spread of respiratory illnesses in a manner eerily similar to, though on a smaller scale than, the Roman bath. This whirlwind tour reveals a universal truth. Whether through the grand engineering of Rome, the practical drainage of the Indus Valley, the athletic culture of Greece, the religious devotion of Egypt, or the adaptive rituals of the Maya, every advanced ancient culture grappled with the imperative to create clean, orderly spaces. And in every case, their solutions, no matter how ingenious, unintentionally created new vectors for danger. The specific risks differed. Lead poisoning for the Romans, parasitic infections for the Indus Valley residents, localized droughts for the Greeks, waterborne diseases for the Egyptians, and mosquito-borne illnesses for the Maya. Yet the underlying paradox was a constant across the globe. The human drive to separate ourselves from the chaos of nature, to impose order and purity on our environment, is a defining trait of civilization. But as these cultures discovered, that very impulse often weaves new and unexpected perils into the fabric of our beautifully constructed worlds, proving that the pursuit of cleanliness is an ancient, complex, and never-ending negotiation with the hidden laws of nature. Perhaps the most enduring myth we've inherited is the image of the impeccably clean Roman, toga spotless, daily immersed in the soothing waters of the public baths. This picture, while not entirely false, is a dramatic oversimplification. The reality was far more complex and considerably less sanitary. Yes, the Romans built incredible bath complexes and had a cultural obsession with the appearance of cleanliness, but this public performance often masked a different private reality. For the wealthy elite, frequent bathing was a social ritual, but for the vast majority living in cramped, insular apartment blocks, access to water was limited. They might only visit the baths once a week, and even then, they were stepping into a communal broth we now know was teeming with pathogens. Their cleanliness was a facade, a layer of public hygiene that could be washed on and off, but one that did little to protect them from the invisible threats sharing the water. Another common misconception is that these advanced societies were somehow ignorant of the dangers around them, blindly stumbling into disease. The truth is far more fascinating. Ancient people were astute observers of their world and had developed a sophisticated, if imperfect, understanding of cause and effect. A Roman engineer would absolutely know that drinking from a swamp would make you sick. They could clearly see the connection between stagnant water and illness. This practical knowledge is why they went to such incredible lengths to bring fast-moving, clean-looking water from distant mountains via aqueducts. Their failure was not a lack of observation, but a lack of microscopic vision. They could avoid the things that looked dangerous but had no conception of the invisible world of bacteria and viruses. They correctly identified bad smells, miasma, as a correlate of disease, but they incorrectly assumed the smell itself was the cause, rather than just a symptom of the same filthy conditions that bred the real, invisible killers. This gap in knowledge explains the greatest paradox of all: how a sacred space, meticulously maintained and revered, could still be a source of illness. We often imagine ancient temples as pristine sanctuaries, but their safety was defined by spiritual terms, not biological ones. A priest performing ablutions in a sacred spring was concerned with ritual purity, washing away spiritual contamination to appease the gods. If worshippers later fell ill with dysentery, the explanation was not a contaminated water source, but a failure in the ritual, a displeased deity, or the malevolent influence of a demon. Their framework for understanding health was rooted in religion and philosophy, not germ theory. They were not ignoring the danger, they were interpreting the same tragic outcomes through an entirely different cultural lens, one that placed divine will above natural cause. We also tend to romanticize ancient solutions, imagining natural cleaning agents as inherently safer than our modern chemicals. This, too, is a dangerous oversimplification. While the Romans used vinegar and ash, they also relied on highly toxic substances. They cleaned their clothes with fermented human urine for its ammonia content, exposing laundry workers to corrosive fumes that damaged their lungs. They used lead-based cosmetics for a fashionable pale complexion, directly applying a potent neurotoxin to their skin. Their most powerful disinfectant was often quicklime, a highly caustic material that could cause severe chemical burns. The ancient quest for cleanliness was not a gentle, all-natural affair. It was a constant negotiation with a limited and often hazardous chemical palette. where the solutions could be as dangerous as the problems they sought to solve. By dismantling these myths, we don't diminish the achievements of ancient peoples, we humanize them. We replace a simplistic story of glorious hygiene or ignorant squalor with a far more compelling narrative of ingenuity constrained by incomplete information. They were not primitive fools wallowing in filth, nor were they modern scientists in togas. They were intelligent people doing the best they could with the knowledge they had, creating magnificent systems that inadvertently generated new and complex problems. Understanding this nuanced reality allows us to view our own modern systems of cleanliness with a more critical and humble eye. It prepares us to ask what hidden dangers might be lurking in our own seemingly safe spaces, and what future generations, with the benefit of hindsight, might one day say about our own well-intentioned but imperfect solutions. Looking ahead, the lessons embedded in ancient sanitation failures and successes are far from mere historical footnotes. They are active, living blueprints for building healthier, more resilient cities of the future. Imagine urban planners and public health officials not just studying modern data, but actively mining the archaeological record to avoid repeating the same mistakes. The Roman reliance on massive, centralized aqueducts created a single point of failure that could cripple an entire city. This directly informs today's push for decentralized, redundant water systems. Future neighborhoods might incorporate localized water capture, purification, and storage, drawing inspiration from the distributed reservoir networks of ancient Anchor or the clever cisterns of the Maya. This approach would make communities less vulnerable to large-scale contamination events or infrastructure attacks, creating a web of resilience instead of a fragile chain. Emerging technologies are poised to revolutionize this entire field, turning historical speculation into precise, data-driven insight. Artificial intelligence is now being trained to analyze millennia of archaeological data, sifting through patterns that would be invisible to the human eye. Machine learning algorithms can cross-reference records of disease outbreaks in ancient texts with geological surveys of local water sources, potentially pinpointing the exact origin of a historical plague with startling accuracy. Three-dimensional modeling and simulation software can recreate the airflow in a Roman bathhouse or the water pressure in an Indus Valley drain, allowing us to virtually test how subtle design changes could have prevented the buildup of toxic gases or stagnant pools. These digital tools act as a kind of time-traveling laboratory where we can run endless experiments on the past to safeguard the future. This research could even lead to a surprising revival of some ancient practices, albeit with a modern scientific understanding. The Roman use of vinegar as a disinfectant or the Egyptian use of natron as a cleaning abrasive were based on observable effectiveness, and we now know their antimicrobial properties have a solid basis in chemistry. Researchers are actively studying these and other ancient remedies, not to reject modern medicine, but to develop new, sustainable alternatives to harsh chemical cleaners that contribute to antibiotic resistance and environmental pollution. We might see the development of new plant-based disinfectants inspired by herbal practices, or the integration of copper alloys known to the ancients for their antimicrobial properties into high-touch surfaces in hospitals and public transit, creating passively hygienic environments without the constant need for chemical sprays. Ultimately, the greatest implication is a profound shift in perspective, viewing history not as a static record of what happened, but as a vast, long-term dataset on human adaptation. The ancient world conducted a thousands-year-long experiment in urban living, and we have the incredible privilege of studying the results. By understanding the unintended consequences of their innovations, from lead pipes to communal baths, we gain a powerful predictive lens for our own technological choices. This knowledge empowers us to ask better questions about the materials we use today, the designs we approve for tomorrow, and the potential hidden hazards we might be building into our own seemingly pristine environments. The goal is not to replicate the past, but to learn from its complex, often tragic, wisdom to create a future that is not only cleaner, but genuinely safer for everyone. Now, after this deep dive into the paradoxes of the past, I'm incredibly curious to hear your perspective. This isn't just history, it's a mirror reflecting our own modern world. So let me ask you this: have you ever walked into a place that was spotless, gleaming under bright lights, yet something about it made you feel deeply uneasy or unsafe? Maybe it was a hospital corridor that was a little too quiet and sterile, or a brand new airport terminal that felt oddly impersonal and vast. That gut feeling is the modern echo of what ancient people lived with daily, the unsettling disconnect between appearance and reality. Share your experience in the comments below. I truly want to know what spaces trigger that instinct for you. And since we've spent so much time learning from ancient mistakes, let's flip the script and consider their successes. If you could bring one ancient cleanliness or sanitation practice back into widespread use today, which would it be and why? Would it be the Roman commitment to public bathing as a community hub despite the risks, to combat the loneliness and disconnection of modern life? Or perhaps the Indus Valley's brilliant separation of waste streams, a 4,000-year-old idea that could revolutionize our recycling and water management. Maybe you're inspired by the use of simple, natural substances like vinegar and ash for cleaning, a move away from harsh chemicals. Tell me which ancient innovation you think holds the most promise for our future. Your stories and ideas are more than just comments, they're a vital part of this conversation. This channel is built on a community of curious minds, and your insights often shape the topics we explore next. By sharing what you've noticed about the modern world or which ancient solutions you admire, you're helping to build a living, breathing discussion about how we can build a world that is both cleaner and genuinely safer for everyone. So please take a moment to add your voice. Let's see what we can learn from each other before we wrap up with the final takeaways. So as our journey through these pristine yet perilous ancient spaces draws to a close, let's gather the threads of this remarkable story. We began by marveling at the astonishing engineering and profound cultural ambition that drove societies to create islands of cleanliness, grand bathhouses, flowing aqueducts, sacred pools, and orderly marketplaces. These were not mere utilities, they were powerful symbols of civilization's triumph over chaos, testaments to human ingenuity and our deep-seated desire for order, health, and even divine favor. Yet, time and again, we discovered that within these beautiful, well-scrubbed environments lay hidden a web of dangers, each more ironic than the last. The very water designed to purify and nourish often carried invisible killers, from lead leaching from pipes to bacteria thriving in stagnant cisterns. The magnificent bathhouses, centers of social and physical cleansing, became efficient engines for spreading contagion through shared water and steamy, crowded air. The sophisticated sewers and latrines that whisked waste away could trap toxic gases or collapse without warning, while the harsh cleaning agents and fashionable cosmetics contained poisons that slowly seeped into the body. Perhaps most fascinating were the cultural and psychological layers, the deeply held medical theories and religious beliefs that caused people to trust their senses over unseen threats, to value ritual purity over biological safety, and to persist in using dangerous spaces because they symbolized order and control. We saw how these risks were unevenly distributed, with the poor and the enslaved bearing the brunt of the danger, maintaining the illusion of cleanliness for the elite at great personal cost. And we observed how these ancient challenges eerily foreshadow our own modern dilemmas, from superbugs in our hospitals to chemical contaminants in our water, reminding us that the pursuit of purity is always a complex negotiation with unintended consequences. The central, enduring paradox is this: in their passionate quest to separate themselves from filth and disease, ancient societies often constructed beautiful, sophisticated traps that concentrated risk and created new vulnerabilities. This isn't a story of ignorance or failure, but rather a profound lesson in humility. It teaches us that every technological solution carries hidden costs, that our cultural perceptions can create dangerous blind spots, and that true safety requires looking beyond gleaming surfaces to understand the complex, interconnected systems we build and inhabit. These echoes from the past are not mere history. They are a cautionary tale and a guide, urging us to build a future that is not only cleaner, but wiser and truly safer for all. What we uncover in these ancient streets and sparkling bathhouses is far more than a forgotten chapter of history. It is a timeless reflection of our own relentless pursuit of order in a chaotic world. This exploration reveals a delicate and perpetual balancing act that every society must navigate: the drive to create clean, controlled, and beautiful spaces, forever set against the unpredictable and often hidden risks that such order can create. Our fascination with these cities endures because their struggle is so deeply familiar. We see our own modern dilemmas mirrored in their marble and mortar, the trade-offs between progress and peril, between the grand systems we build and the unintended consequences they unleash. The past teaches us that civilization is not a destination of perfect safety, but a continuous, careful negotiation. The Roman philosopher Seneca, who witnessed both the grandeur and the gritty underbelly of imperial life, offered an observation that cuts to the heart of this paradox. He wrote, "What is the point of having countless books and libraries, whose titles their owners can scarcely read through in a whole lifetime? The learner is not taught, but burdened by the mass of information, and it is much better to surrender yourself to a few authors than to wander through many." While he spoke of knowledge, his wisdom applies equally to our physical world. We can become so burdened by the sheer mass of our own ingenious creations, the vast networks of pipes, the towering bath complexes, the sprawling cities, that we fail to see the subtle dangers woven into their fabric. We surrender to the appearance of order rather than seeking a deeper, more meaningful understanding of true safety. Let this journey be an invitation to always look beyond the surface. The most compelling truths of history are rarely found in the gleaming facade, but in the complex, often contradictory, reality just beneath. Question the stories we tell ourselves about our own modern world. What gleaming surfaces in our lives today might conceal their own hidden trade-offs? What systems designed for our comfort and convenience might be creating new, invisible vulnerabilities? The past urges us to be curious, to be critical, and to understand that every symbol of human achievement has a shadow side waiting to be discovered. If this deep dive into the beautiful dangers of the ancient world has sparked your curiosity, then you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the mysteries history has left behind. Share this video with a friend who sees the world a little differently, who loves to question the obvious and dig for deeper truths. And most importantly, add your voice to the conversation below. I am genuinely eager to know what part of this story surprised you the most, or what modern parallel you couldn't help but see. Your perspective is what turns a history lesson into a living, breathing discussion. Thank you for watching, and remember, the greatest adventures are always hidden just beneath the surface.